everyone. Welcome to the weekly recap. So this is, as promised, the continuation from last recap, which was about a week ago. But we also are going to have 2 videos tonight because there's just a lot of conversations to have. There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, most likely 2. We might end up putting them together and make like a really long one.
But there is lots of content.
We're going to definitely have fun with this video. Tons of stuff going on.
This is going to be a blast because there's tons of really interesting things going on. Things that are behind the scenes.
Yeah, who knew the end of the year would have the best stuff?
Seriously, I was not expecting all this crazy stuff. So this week alone, we had Game Awards and PSX.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I'm hearing a lot of feedback that the Game Awards were great.
Yeah.
And that the PSX was terrible. I think we both completely disagree with that, and we would switch the two.
Yeah.
Because Game Awards was
Game Awards. Honestly, it was one big advertisement from start to finish.
It was one big advertisement. And I laugh because one of the things we've been talking about and are continuing to talk about is this war on microtransactions and this war on being sold everything.
Yeah.
And yet the reason people didn't think PSX was good because they weren't selling a whole bunch. They weren't doing trailers and sales and ads and give me money. They were having real
discussions.
And in Game Awards, you had developers saying, "Oh, we're the good developers because we do this, this, and that," and then they'd play their ad, and they're like, "Give us money because we just said this."
Speaking of that, I want to say something about that. So I think it was Bethesda that did that. That they're the ones that are the good ones because they're doing single player. I strongly believe that the award that they won right before that happened was paid for. I don't think that was genuine in any way, shape, or form because they had Zachary Levi come out on stage. He makes an anti-microtransaction joke, all right? Then tries to really sell it again.
Yeah.
Then they give Bethesda the award. Then, just a minute or 2 later, they do their little advert for promoting Bethesda.
Oh, it was well planned.
You cannot tell me that wasn't paid for, that whole thing.
It was literally an ad. It was planned completely.
Absolutely.
And they would have had to know exactly what was going to happen to have it placed that way.
Yes.
So the Game Awards, in my opinion, they were the Game Awards, right? They were just like always, kind of.
So there's a lot of people saying, you mentioned it, a lot of people are saying that this was like the best Game Awards ever.
Compared to what, though?
We've been hearing just hours and hours of people singing their praises on social media, on podcasts, whatever. And they're comparing it to the previous Game Awards that are really, 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 really bad.
The bar was incredibly low.
If your bar is rock bottom, and you beat that pretty well, yes, it's going to seem quite a bit better.
You're not very far above rock bottom, but you were sure better than last year.
It doesn't even matter how far above it you are at that point. So they're comparing it to previous Game Awards that were really just atrocious, just terrible start to finish.
The whole idea is just so shaded in bias and
definitely
just the whole game that we're really ultimately talking about. PSX was fascinating because... it was kind of this awkward format where they put all these people on this couch, but we really found what you and I have been saying since we've had a channel, and way before that we really want. We always complain that we don't know what's going on at Sony. We don't ever hear from them. We don't ever see, we just see their little ads.
We don't get any information.
That's it, and we have no information. We have nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
They sat these people down for a solid 2.5 hours.
Yes.
And they asked the tough questions.
They asked them hard questions.
They talked about the development that we never really get to hear about, especially on the Sony end. Microsoft's developers you hear from a lot more.
Oh, constantly.
And they had their big people there, and they didn't sell us much.
Yeah, they really didn't. I mean, first, I think we need to talk about the positive thing that we thought the best part of PSX was...
The best part of PSX was
Detroit. Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are saying they didn't like what they saw of Detroit.
Really?
It's funny because you have the Telltale games out there. You have Mass Effect with some of the major decisions that even, were kind of muted at the very end of the game if you got all the way to part 3 at the end.
Yeah.
Then you have some other games like Heavy Rain and those types of games where your decisions supposedly matter as you go along. I haven't seen any game.
Those, right?
People love them. All of that stuff is super popular. I haven't seen any game do what Detroit is doing, where little tiny decisions that shouldn't really factor into anything in any of those other games they could become monumental. Really they could become huge towards your decision-making process at the end of your mission or the end of the game or whatever it is. Yeah. And not only that, but there's another factor that's not available in those other games. Time. So time is of the essence.
I was just sitting here thinking about time because, time is of the essence. Mm-hmm. And that's really rare because you see it occasionally in a video game where one part of one mission, there's a timer.
Yes, yeah.
This is like so he walks in. If you didn't see the trailer, the android walks in, and his first decision is, do I pick up this fish or not, and help it get back into its tank? And the developer says, everything you do, even something this silly, has a consequence. Yeah. And we later find out it's time, because you have this entire apartment that you're trying to search, and you're getting clues, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you have to figure out certain things to get progressed
and
forward.
The more clues you figure out, the better your ending
you'll do.
Could potentially be.
Yeah, but your time is of the essence.
Yeah, and if you're gonna just run through it real quickly just to try to get to the end of that little mission, then you're not gonna have enough information.
Lot more trouble.
Yeah. Which to me is really cool. Like that's what I liked really about cool. Heavy Rain that was my favorite part of the game.
Yeah.
And they're really upping the ante, and they're making it tense. They're adding tension.
It was tense. So he's looking around, and you can find all these clues, tiny clues, huge clues, and you have to find certain clues. You have to find all the pieces to a puzzle for the puzzle to reconstruct in front of you. And I heard that there's like 2,000 pages of script for this, because there's so many possibilities.
Yeah.
I thought the whole thing was completely fascinating.
Loved it, yeah.
It seemed so interesting. It seemed like something I haven't played before.
This is that one killer app that I feel like Sony's been missing this entire generation. People have been trying to sell us. We've joked about this a million times. I've been joking about it on Twitter lately. People have tried to sell us on these little rinky-dink games that came out earlier this year that we now find out didn't even sell very well at all because nobody was buying them.
Hellblade.
Yeah.
Remember when everyone made this huge deal? They told you to buy a PlayStation to buy Hellblade, which was also
it wasn't just Hellblade. People were saying you should buy a PS4 Pro to play MLB The Show at one point in time, and it wasn't just PlayStation people. It was Xbox guys were telling everyone to do that. So that's pretty funny. But I mean, you finally have something that's really that showpiece title, and it is Detroit. So looks really good. Everybody I've talked to that has played it says it's just amazing.
Yeah,
you have to play it to really understand why. Where you get that tension, that build up, your heart rate starts increasing.
And they were doing a thing where the audience was like verbally voting for like the decisions he made, and they kept showing people, and they looked like it was happening to them.
Yeah.
They looked tense. The
audience was worried.
Into it. There was a girl crying. Like it was crazy, and I felt that way. I was sitting there like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? And that's what we need.
The show was putting me to sleep until they showed Detroit, and that's when I really kind of sat up
and paid attention. Yeah, that was amazing. So
because they started off with PSVR, which wasn't the way to start that show.
Started off with PSVR again, and they started off with these VR games that have these terrible graphics that look like 2010.
PS3 era graphics,
Yeah, and it continues to push, and there's some other VR things that were discussed.
Definitely.
There was, essentially, this will all be somewhat random in order because it's all the things that kind of happened on these couches.
Yes, yeah.
So essentially, they had Shawn Leyden and Sid, what is his last name?
Oh, I can't remember, but they had a bunch.
He was the one really hosting.
Mark
and then
Cerny.
Had Mark Cerny. And even Andy House showed up.
And then a few of their top developers that run some of their top teams.
Yeah, so then the top developers for the games coming out now. So the conversations were, where are you at? When can we expect your game? What have you been going through recently? Are you in your final stages? It was the real conversation.
The things that we want to know. The things that Sony never gives us ever.
But you know what's really interesting? Is they didn't give us a lot of those answers.
Well, they didn't, but if you read between the lines, or read between what they said, there was information there, and that's what made it so interesting to me. That's the reason why I liked PSX this year.
Fascinating.
Because they kind of stumbled over some things, and they were like, we've got this launch window, and we want to try to meet that, but we can't. They go to the next developer, same thing. He's saying basically the same thing.
Nobody had a date.
The game's been in development for 7 years. Yes, we want to hit this launch window. We've got that. We're nearing the final stages. You kept hearing that over and over again as they talked to everybody on the couch. And my theory, you had a theory. I have a theory about that. You want to do yours first?
Yeah, so I was going to say we have a few predictions that are actually correct.
Yeah.
So there's the 7-year development time that you've been saying for a while.
Yes.
There was also something that happened where Shawn Leyden essentially admitted that he's in his previous role and his current role.
Yeah.
So we talked about at one point that we think in a lot of these cases when they're moving somebody up, they're not giving them a new title and replacing them.
They're having to do more work.
Pull more weight.
And he basically said that.
And he basically said, the cool thing about being the head of interactive entertainment, but still the head of marketing is, and it exposed this idea that we've been thinking that they just keep piling work on and they're not actually creating new positions. And then the third thing that we were accurate in was what was sort of going on with Andy House.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they actually had Andy House come and they asked him point blank, they said, so what happened?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Where are you going? Why are you leaving? Mm. And he does this 5-minute thing about how great the condition of the company is. Mm. He says the company's in such good condition. It's the best I've ever seen it. Mentions several specifics that are at the best performance he's seen them.
Yeah.
And then quite literally goes, so it's time for one more adventure.
Yeah.
Doesn't say what the adventure is, and that kind of supports our theory that
there
isn't
very,
one.
That's very similar to what Adam Boyes had to say.
Very similar.
When he left. So it almost seems like Andy's kind of like using some of his way of dealing with it, the PR of dealing with that. They have
like this department that handles these weird, why are you leaving things, and they're telling you to say this. It's super weird.
Yeah.
That's, of course, a joke, but, it's like they all have this weird where they go, oh, things are so great. I love working at this company. But I have to go have another adventure. I'm just not sure what it is yet.
Yeah, and it was funny to see his disposition and the way he was talking, and he was kind of sitting back a little bit and kind of like
and almost taking forever to get to the point.
Almost a little slumped in his posture and everything. And then you look at what was the name? The first guy that they brought out.
Are you talking about
Shawn Leyden?
Shawn Leyden, yeah.
So Shawn Leyden's disposition was very different this time. He was very confident. He didn't stumble over anything he said. He always stumbles over stuff all the time.
He always stumbles.
He was very like, yeah, this is my show. This is my thing. And he even made a few jokes about the developers getting their games out.
Yeah, and he wasn't. Usually he's two things. He stumbles and he's selling.
And he seems awkward.
Isn't this marvelous? Isn't this incredible? Yeah. And he was totally laid back, which was
And he's
really
usually pretty awkward, and he wasn't this time.
He wasn't. He stole the show almost.
Yeah. So I feel like they gave him more power, and then they took away power from others, and you can see
they're
that.
going to make him work 2 jobs. They should give him power.
Yeah, that's true.
At least it's finally happened the way that it seemed like it should. Mm-hmm. And so going back to what we were kind of headed into, there was one big question that's the really tough question that everybody wanted to ask Sony. Yes. Why don't we get any release dates? We literally just heard 15 times 2018. Mm-hmm. And so Greg Miller from Kind of Funny did a little bit of a candid interview at the end, and he said, so why? Why no release dates? When are we going to get release dates for some of these games that 2018's upon us and we don't have dates?
Yeah.
And you and I each have a theory about this.
Definitely.
And I think yours is probably better, so I'll let yours go second after mine. But my theory is essentially, it is interesting, right? Because Microsoft is expected to have their release dates put together. I mean, they would just get eaten alive.
But Microsoft did the exact same thing, sat on the couch and made those jokes.
2018.
Yeah, they would get ripped apart by every media site, and then following the next day, every YouTuber.
And everyone on Twitter.
And we'd hear about it on podcasts for about 17 straight weeks.
Yeah.
So
my thought is, the thing that just popped in my head instantly is I was like, I think they just don't have enough control over their developers where they can't get them to give a date, or they just don't trust them enough. And it could be either of those or both of those, to where they're like, yeah, well, I can't. They keep telling me they're close, which was what the people on the couch were saying. We're close. We're in final stages. We're in testing, but they would not give you anything. So my thought was, wow, Sony needs to get a hold of these developers that are working for them. But then you had a more interesting theory than that.
Yeah, so my theory actually ties back into what we were talking about, the games that came out earlier this year on the PlayStation that were exclusive titles or they were on PlayStation and PC, so they weren't on Xbox platform, essentially. Mm-hmm. This is before the Switch.
Yeah.
When this whole thing started, this whole narrative that we've been seeing this entire year.
Yeah.
So they came out with all these games that were exclusive, and everybody was marketing them as exclusive to PlayStation. Even Xbox guys were talking, you got to buy a PlayStation to play this game. And we find out a lot of these games didn't sell. Some of them only sold 2 million when they were expected to do 5, 6, 7, 8 million. Some of them only sold 500,000. We mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of them that really, really undersold. And I think the reason why is the Switch. I think Nintendo put out their Switch. Everybody was holding their breath, saving their money up for that. They weren't buying games in the early part of the year.
Yeah.
Then, once it came out, it had Zelda. There was a point in time where there were more Zelda copies for the Switch than there were Switches in existence. So people were buying that game waiting for their Switch because they were sold out in stores everywhere.
Yeah.
And then every time they released a game, Mario comes out, Splatoon comes out, millions are selling of these games.
Right.
Then Mario Odyssey later on, Mario Kart was the one I mentioned, Mario Odyssey later on. So all year long, all that money that gamers have been saving for those titles have been going to Nintendo, the Switch, in all of their games. That's why Sony's games are not selling. And I think Sony is 100% completely aware of this right now. Mm-hmm. And I think they're afraid to mention a date for launch of any of their games because Microsoft or Nintendo Microsoft's got 5 big games coming this year, could announce one of their games to go head-to-head with it.
Right.
And Sony does not want to go head-to-head with anybody right now. They're killing on hardware. We've talked about this a billion times. They are absolutely murdering out. There's 70 million PS4s out there. If you believe what's being said, that means they're all in homes and connected, buying stuff on the internet and downloading stuff constantly.
Right.
So if they're doing so well with all that, why are you only selling 500,000 copies of your game when literally the entire internet is trying to sell the game for you?
And keeping in mind, hardware does not profit.
Yeah, they're not making the profits off the hardware. It comes from software.
So you have to have the games. So they're truly in a place of concern where...
Definitely.
And, maybe that's even where Shawn Leyden's increased confidence came from, it almost sounds like somebody at some point had this epiphany where they went, I know... We won't give our games dates. We'll get them ready. And then we'll plan the dates when Microsoft and Nintendo have announced theirs.
Yes.
So we can land ours where they aren't.
Where there are no other games.
And it's like it's a strategy and it's developed a little bit of confidence.
Well, it's smart.
It is smart.
Yeah.
It's a good idea because why would you ever want to launch head-to-head with a game from your own platform or any other? And so it's almost like somebody just had this idea and realized, we'll time our games.
Sony's been in this for 22 years. They've become very, very smart with their tactics and their strategies.
They are.
They're a lot more advanced than both Nintendo and Microsoft right now. And
Absolutely.
So their planning is top notch. They're not going to give you a date until they know it has an open window to sell.
Yeah. Well, and here's the interesting thing. They are getting really good at this. What they're getting good at is the thing, and to be clear, every company does this. Just some of them are getting better at it than others.
Yeah.
But of that manipulation of the consumer. And one of the places we saw that in some of the awkward questions that Shawn Leyden got asked is he gets asked basically, so what's going on with VR? Why is it? And he didn't say the word flop, but he essentially said, why is VR such a flop? And Shawn Leyden literally... The person said it's a flop because it's 2 million, and Shawn Leyden goes, "Yeah, 2 million! Isn't that great?" And literally, the person asking the question, which I think was Greg Miller, is like,
"Yes, 2 million is great."
And that's the thing is they're good at this. They're realizing what they can say to switch the mind of the consumer. And then he says that they're relaunching VR. He says, well, we're basically relaunching
always the
VR
sign of a success.
Because of a manipulated tactic where he says, well, we had a lot of stock problems in the first few months. We had a lot of problems keeping it in stock. And that's the new narrative. Nintendo's done this forever. We've talked about Nintendo doing it where you create scarcity. And you make it look scarce.
Or maybe you don't create it, but you highlight it.
You highlight it.
Yeah.
You don't ship out so many of your VR units that you walk into a GameStop and they're stacked floor to ceiling to where you can tell nobody else bought it. So why would I then buy it?
Well, I mean, I used to work for companies that actually had other companies that were in between them that would basically accumulate aggregate or metadata to find out about the impressions. How much time do we have, by the way?
We have a good 7 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So there's companies out there, there's firms that actually measure impressions and they count up impressions on something. Yeah. So you saw this with the HTC Vive and you saw it with the Oculus Rifts. There was this trajectory that was just going incredible. The hype was incredible for VR until it launched. As soon as it launched, it hit a flat line.
So Oculus and Vive launch after months of data
they
saying
were the two
VR's
first.
exciting, VR's exciting,
Yes.
Look at these impressions going up, and then it actually hits the market and it flatlines.
And then it kind of flatlines. So what do? They don't want to ship tons of these everywhere and have pallets of them sitting out or just completely full shelves of these. That looks bad to the consumer. So what they do is they hold back on shipments and they say, well, there's scarcity.
Yeah.
You start to see on eBay and Amazon, they're selling for $200 more than what they were. We saw that.
We did.
Nintendo
has that happen every time they launch.
Definitely, yeah. I actually bought an Oculus Rift at launch. I got it from their website. I didn't buy it off of that. I just waited for the right time when it became available. So there's some people that do that, and there's some people that know how to do that and then resell them. And that makes it look even more scarce. That makes it look even better.
Yep.
I strongly believe Sony saw the data they got, all the impressions they were getting. They saw that same thing that happened with Oculus, and they decided to make it look scarce for a very long time. Because analysts were saying, and they were even saying, 2.6 million was what they were supposed to sell by the end of 2016. they were nowhere near that. They were at like 700,000 or something like that. And then it took another year on top of that just to get to 2 million. So they still haven't even hit their initial launch window predictions for PSVR. That's where the relaunch comes in.
That's where the relaunch comes in. And so he's essentially saying, oh, well, we had stock issues and we had these things that kind of stood in our way, but it's so popular, you know, we're relaunching it now and we're going to see the numbers now. So that was really interesting. And that kind of relates to something else. So when we think about the VR launching and we think about PSVR, you could connect that to the Kinect. You could connect it to the Kinect, quite literally.
Yeah.
Which was 150, and right now there's like an emergency price cut that just happened with the PS Pro and the PSVR.
Yeah, PSVR is 200.
PSVR is 200, so that's pretty close to the cost of Kinect.
Pretty close,
at least for this current scenario. Kinect sold 50 million.
Yeah, I think upwards of that, I believe. Yeah,
and that's 2 million versus 50 million.
Not only that, some people are trying to say it's not apples to apples or whatever, but I mean that's considered a failure now.
Yeah, Kinect is considered a failure.
But same people are saying 2 million is a success. How do we get that?
Yes, they are. Isn't that interesting?
That's pretty bad.
And here's another interesting thing. So we've seen some early sales of the X. And you have a prediction for where the X is going to land, right? So right now we're over 500,000 from November 7th to now.
Yeah, we believe. We don't have 100% solid information, but most likely.
Somewhere around there. And so by the end of the year or in the next few months, where do you think we're going to be?
Definitely 700,000 as a minimum, and then possibly upwards of 1 million. It's very, very possible that could happen. Because November is very big for console sales, and then people forget it because that November has Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Right. But December is very big for consoles. Huge. Lots of people don't get their shopping done in November at all because they've got life going on, and it ends up falling in December. So very, very possible upwards of 1 million. Over the next few months, it can continue. Hype is incredible. You're even seeing the media sites start to switch their agendas a little bit and their narratives a little bit.
Yeah, there's been some really interesting little developments.
Very positive info for the X.
And when you think about the X, so the X is, first of all, twice the cost, more than twice the cost of the VR.
On sale, it is. But when they're not on sale, they're about the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think of the same cost. When you think about the X, you got to realize to some people, to the people who object to buying the X, because the X is definitely a premium product, so is VR.
Yes.
But the objection to the X is quite simple. Well, my Xbox One does that, or my Xbox One S does that. It's just improved performance and graphics, but it's still doing something similar to a product I own.
It's just giving
VR's not.
It's just all the X does is give you a better version of everything else that's out there.
Own.
Yeah.
So that allows a lot of people to not buy it.
Or for people that don't own it, for something they could get a lot cheaper by buying an S that's on sale. I saw it for $179 the other day. So much cheaper to get an S, and it's still selling very well, even with that out there.
And VR is not like something you're replacing that you have unless you just happen to be in that tiny percentage of people who had the first Oculus or had the first VR.
Yeah.
So that's something that's a new product. They're both premium products, but the VR is new. It's something you haven't had before. You're not replacing something, and there's not really a way around buying that. Yeah. So that's an interesting comparison in how the numbers look. And it will be interesting to see how the numbers continue to look. Yeah. There's one other thing that Shawn Leyden got asked that I thought was really interesting, and I think that concludes PSX unless we've missed anything.
Yeah, pretty much.
So he also gets asked, what is going on? And Shawn Leyden was not expecting this question. He gets asked, so when are we going to be able to change our PSN names? Yeah. And the way the question was asked sounded like this had been a plant and there was an answer and everybody got really excited in the audience.
You could hear the audience, You
could hear like not even like excitement, like a rumble. Yeah. Like a wave was about to happen. And he goes, when are we going to be able to change our PSN names? Go, Shawn. And he stutters and he stops for a minute and he kind of rambles and then he goes, well, what we're hoping is by next PSX that we have something to tell you.
It's going to take another year? What?
To have something to hopefully tell you. Yeah. Not even
by
next PSX you can get a change.
Kind, yeah.
So this was a really interesting event because we really saw some questions that were not expected.
We did.
Asked, and we saw that there's nothing better than that stammering response that says, I do not know the answer to that, which means it's not coming.
Well, that is the very thing that makes the PSX entertaining and interesting to me, and the award show was just absolute garbage to start to finish.
It was all scripted. It was a bunch of scripted ads, scripted awards. You know,
you can. I actually kind of want to go back and watch the PSX again just to see the reactions. People have micro reactions to questions, and that tells such a good story.
And there were so many candid questions that told so many stories that you just want to know. You found out a lot. We found out a lot. I feel like we made up for the last 6 months of saying, where's PlayStation?
More than 6 months. We've made up for the last year of them just being dark on everything.
Yeah, and a lot of that was in unexpected questions where somebody just got put on the spot.
Definitely. They did their damage control for PSVR. They did their,
that they were ready for.
Let's hype people for the future. We have all these games coming in 2018, which they pretty much guaranteed all those games they talked about 2018. At least the ones they talked about.
But nothing more specific than that.
And then the name change thing.
And then the name change thing. So that was I really thought that was an interesting event to get a little bit of a window. And hopefully this will cause some continuing conversation to happen.
Oh, definitely.
Hopefully we can see more of what's going on. And
I hope people don't bash it too much, because I'd like to see them do more of these types of things.
Yeah, and that's the concern that we have. People keep comparing it to Microsoft's Gamescom. And what's interesting that I've noticed is you've got Microsoft's Gamescom, which was 2 people on the couch having a conversation. And then you've got PlayStation doing a massive scale of that. And you have people complaining about this, saying, well, that wasn't an event. And it's interesting because these events were meant to be that way. They were meant to be discussion events to let you see in. And so they had this really interesting way of making it not about sales.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so you got to wonder, all these people talking about microtransactions being so bad are saying, don't sell me all this extra stuff. And then they didn't like an event where there's not sales.
Yeah.
There's not trailers.
Where there's just discussing
being sold right now.
They're discussing the things that we do have questions about and what we want to know.
That we already know are supposed to be coming.
Yeah.
We already know something's supposed to be happening. We don't know what's going on with it. And nobody seems to be interested in that, which ultimately means
that's funny.
They want to be sold.
People care more about you summed it up right there, comparing it to the awards show. People care more about seeing advertisements and being sold on things than they do about real information.
These people that don't want to be sold want to be sold.
Yep.
And that you can prove that just by seeing that they hated PSX and they loved Game Awards.
Yep.
There you have it.
Very obviously.
So this does continue into the conversation for the next video, which will pretty much immediately follow this one.
Yes.
We didn't miss anything here, did we?
No. I think that's pretty good. I think we got it, yeah. We'll do shout outs next video as well.
We will do shout outs next video, so thanks for watching.